On the 12th of September 1974, the long reign of Emperor Haile Selassie I, also known as the Lion of Judah, came to an abrupt and humiliating end in Addis Ababa. For months, unrest had been building in Ethiopia: strikes by workers, student protests, mutinies in the military, and growing resentment over famine and corruption. By this point, the newly formed military committee, known as the Derg, had already stripped Selassie of most of his powers, placing ministers and officials under arrest. That September morning, they decided to remove him completely. At dawn, soldiers surrounded the Jubilee Palace, the emperor's residence. Haile Selassie, frail and in his 80s, was informed that he was no longer Emperor of Ethiopia. There was no formal announcement of abdication, no ceremony, only armed men delivering the news. His aides and loyal guards were dismissed, and the emperor was escorted out of the palace. The moment was striking. Selassie, once a symbol of African independence and revered on the world stage, was forced into the back seat of a blue Volkswagen Beetle, a humiliating contrast to the limousines and imperial processions that had once carried him. Crowds gathered silently as soldiers drove him through the streets of Addis Ababa. Some onlookers watched with disbelief, others with bitterness, seeing the end of an era. He was taken to the Menelik Palace, now under Derg control, where he was placed under house arrest. The monarchy was officially abolished, and the Derg declared Ethiopia a republic. That single day marked the collapse of a dynasty that had ruled for centuries. The deposition of Haile Selassie was not just the fall of a monarch, but the death of Ethiopia's imperial system, replaced by a military regime that would plunge the nation into a new and violent chapter of its history. All this was able to happen to Haile Selassie because of one fatal mistake he made during his reign, which is what we shall be discussing in this video. So hold tight for this one. This is how one mistake led to the downfall of Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's last emperor. Haile Selassie I, born as Lij Tafari Makonnen on July 23, 1892, in Ejer-Sagoro, a small village in the Harar province of Ethiopia, emerged as one of the most significant leaders of the 20th century, both for Ethiopia and the world. His story is one of tradition meeting modernity, ambition fueled by divine destiny, and an empire caught between ancient monarchy and the challenges of global politics. He was born into the noble Shiwan aristocracy, the son of Ras Makonnen Vole Mikael, a trusted general and cousin of Emperor Menelik II. His father instilled in him a sense of discipline, loyalty to the crown, and vision for Ethiopia's survival in a rapidly changing world. From his earliest years, Tafari was marked for greatness. He received an education rare for Ethiopian nobles at the time, learning not only the traditional Ge'ez scriptures, but also French and other modern subjects. This blend of traditional Ethiopian heritage and modern exposure gave him a sharp advantage among his peers, positioning him as a bridge between old Ethiopia and new horizons. His political rise began in his teenage years when Emperor Menelik II appointed him to minor administrative roles, recognizing his intelligence and ambition. After his father's death in 1906, young Tafari steadily climbed the ranks of Ethiopian nobility, becoming governor of Sidamo at just 13 years old, and later governor of Harar, a crucial region for trade and politics. His reputation for fairness, administrative efficiency, and reform-mindedness quickly spread. Unlike many nobles, Tafari was approachable and believed in accountability, qualities that endeared him to both the common people and progressive elites. However, his rise was not without challenge. The Ethiopian aristocracy was deeply divided, and Tafari had to navigate court, intrigue, rivalry, and suspicion, all while maintaining his steady ambition. The turning point in his rise came after the death of Emperor Menelik II in 1913. The succession crisis placed Menelik's grandson, Lij Iyasu, on the throne, but Iyasu's erratic rule and sympathy for Islam alienated the Christian nobility and church. In 1916, Ieyasu was deposed in a coup, and Menelik's daughter, Empress Zuditu, assumed the throne. Tafari was elevated to the title of Ras and made regent and heir apparent. This arrangement left him effectively running the government, while Zuditu served as a symbolic monarch. From 1916 to 1930, Ras Tafari consolidated power. He championed modernization, expanded Ethiopia's foreign diplomacy, and built alliances that strengthened his claim to the throne. He was instrumental in Ethiopia joining the League of Nations in 1923, marking the country as one of the few independent African nations at the time. This move not only placed Ethiopia on the world stage, but also bolstered Tafari's image as a modern, forward-looking leader. When Empress Zuditu died in 1930, Tafari was crowned emperor on November 2, 1930, taking the throne as Haile Selassie I, meaning power of the Trinity. His coronation was a grand spectacle attended by international dignitaries, solidifying his global recognition. The event also marked the beginning of a reign that would blend Ethiopia's ancient traditions with an effort to modernize state institutions. Haile Selassie moved quickly to introduce reforms. In 1931, he promulgated Ethiopia's first written constitution, which limited the absolute power of the monarchy and introduced a semblance of parliamentary governance, though in practice, his power remained supreme. He pursued infrastructure development, built schools, encouraged modern education, and attempted to centralize the state's authority by reducing the autonomy of regional nobles. His reign, however, faced its greatest challenge in 1935, when fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in a bid to avenge its defeat at Adwa in 1896 and expand its empire. Despite Ethiopia's valiant resistance, including the use of traditional armies and limited modern equipment, the Italians, armed with tanks, aircraft, and poison gas, overwhelmed the country. In May 1936, Haile Selassie fled into exile in Britain after delivering a historic speech at the League of Nations in Geneva, where he warned the world of the dangers of fascist aggression and famously declared, "It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." His speech, though met with mixed reactions at the time, later proved prophetic as World War II engulfed Europe. In exile, Haile Selassie continued to lobby for his country's liberation. His persistence paid off when, in 1941, with the support of British and Allied forces during World War II, Ethiopia was liberated from Italian occupation, and he was restored to the throne. His return was celebrated as a triumph not only for Ethiopia, but also for African dignity and independence, inspiring many anti-colonial movements across the continent. The post-war period was marked by Haile Selassie's efforts to further modernize Ethiopia. He expanded education, built hospitals, developed infrastructure, and worked toward abolishing slavery, which had long been entrenched in Ethiopian society. Internationally, he became a prominent advocate for African unity and independence. He played a central role in the founding of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in Addis Ababa in 1963, cementing Ethiopia's place as a hub of Pan-Africanism. His stature grew so large that he became a revered figure for the Rastafari movement in Jamaica, whose followers saw him as a messianic figure descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Despite his international prestige, Haile Selassie faced growing domestic challenges. His government struggled with inequality, poverty, and slow-paced reforms. Ethiopia remained largely feudal, with peasants suffering under landlords and rural areas deprived of development. Famines in the late 1960s and early 1970s, particularly the catastrophic Wollo famine, exposed the regime's failures and discredited him among the poor. His court was accused of extravagance, while ordinary Ethiopians starved. These crises fueled student protests, worker strikes, and military unrest. By 1974, Ethiopia was in turmoil. a group of military officers formed the Derg, a Marxist junta, which steadily undermined the monarchy. On September 12, 1974, the Derg deposed Haile Selassie, ending over 3 millennia of Solomonic rule. The once revered emperor was placed under house arrest in Addis Ababa, where he died under suspicious circumstances on August 27, 1975, officially from natural causes, though most accounts suggest he was assassinated by the Derg. The downfall of Emperor Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's last monarch and one of the most iconic leaders of the 20th century, can be traced to many issues: political repression, aristocratic rivalries, and military discontent. But if there was one defining mistake that sealed his fate, it was his failure to adequately address the famine and growing social inequality of the 1970s. This oversight did not simply reflect a single lapse of governance, but rather a deeper inability to recognize how neglecting the basic needs of his people would erode the legitimacy of a throne that had survived for centuries. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Ethiopia faced severe challenges, especially in the provinces of Wollo and Tigray, where famine ravaged communities and left hundreds of thousands dead. Haile Selassie, who had once been celebrated as a visionary modernizer and defender of African dignity, was shockingly slow to respond. Reports of starvation were suppressed or ignored by his government, as officials feared that revealing the scale of the crisis would damage the image of the monarchy. Meanwhile, the imperial court remained notorious for its lavish lifestyle: grand banquets, imported luxury goods, and ceremonial displays, creating a stark and bitter contrast between the suffering of the masses and the opulence of their ruler. This image of indifference was a fatal blow to Selassie's once revered reputation as the father of Africa. Students, intellectuals, and workers began to protest in Addis Ababa, pointing directly to famine, inequality, and corruption as evidence that the emperor no longer cared for his people. His silence and refusal to enact meaningful reforms made him appear detached and out of touch, especially to the younger generation who desired land reform, redistribution, and modernization. Instead of opening dialogue, Haile Selassie clung to the traditions of absolute monarchy, believing his divine right to rule and international prestige would shield him from domestic upheaval. This miscalculation, treating Ethiopia's crisis as a passing storm rather than a turning point, meant that he lost the support of the very people who had once adored him. The famine crisis also exposed his vulnerability to the Ethiopian military. Soldiers were underpaid, poorly supplied, and frustrated by both their conditions and the suffering they witnessed among civilians. When mutinies broke out, Selassie again underestimated the danger, dismissing these acts as isolated disobedience. In truth, they reflected a broader collapse of confidence in his leadership. By 1974, the military officers who would form the Derg capitalized on public anger, portraying themselves as protectors of the people against a corrupt and indifferent monarchy. When they moved to depose him in September of that year, there was little resistance from the population. His fall was almost anticlimactic. The Lion of Judah was escorted from his palace in a modest car, watched in silence by citizens who had once cheered his triumphs. If Haile Selassie had recognized the urgency of the famine and prioritized the well-being of his subjects over maintaining an image of imperial grandeur, he might have preserved his throne or at least exited with dignity. Instead, his refusal to face the reality of Ethiopia's suffering allowed the Derg to justify their coup as an act of salvation. Thus, the single greatest mistake that led to his downfall was not simply the famine itself, but his indifference to the plight of ordinary Ethiopians, a blindness that transformed him from a symbol of African independence into a monarch remembered for failing his people in their darkest hour. Emperor Haile Selassie I the last monarch of Ethiopia, met a tragic and controversial end after his overthrow in 1974. At first, he was placed under house arrest in the Grand Palace, stripped of his titles and authority. On August 27, 1975, news of his death was announced, officially attributed to complications from a prostate operation. However, many historians and former regime insiders believe he was murdered by strangulation on the orders of the Derg, who saw him as a lingering symbol of monarchy and a threat to their consolidation of power. His body was buried secretly within the palace grounds, and only decades later, in 2000, was given a proper state funeral in Addis Ababa, where thousands gathered to honor him. Despite the ignominy of his final years, Haile Selassie's legacy is immense and multifaceted. Internationally, he is remembered as a towering figure of the 20th century. His 1936 speech at the League of Nations, warning of the dangers of fascism after Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, made him a global symbol of resistance to oppression. He returned triumphantly in 1941 after World War II, restoring Ethiopian independence and inspiring anti-colonial movements across Africa. He later became a founding father of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1963, positioning Ethiopia as a hub of Pan-Africanism and diplomacy. Domestically, his reign was marked by modernization attempts, introducing schools, infrastructure projects, and Ethiopia's first constitution. Yet, he also left behind contradictions. His failure to adequately address inequality, land reform, and famine contributed to his downfall. To some, he was a reformer and visionary. To others, he was an autocrat detached from his people's suffering. Haile Selassie's legacy also extends beyond politics. To the Rastafari movement in Jamaica and worldwide, he is revered as a messianic figure, believed to be the living embodiment of divine prophecy. This spiritual symbolism has ensured his memory endures far beyond Ethiopia. Emperor Haile Selassie was married to Empress Menen Asfaw, and together they had 6 children. Unfortunately, 4 of those children died before their father, leaving only 2 of his children, who buried him in 1975. To conclude, Haile Selassie died under tragic circumstances, but his legacy lives on as both a symbol of African pride and independence, and a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring the struggles of one's own people. Thanks for watching, and see you on our next video.